we don't do this very often. We're a very positive influence on the world. We take it like a positive stance on basically everything. Today, we're just gonna we're gonna just unleash a little bit of hate. And we're gonna do some just like unmitigated criticism. But I think it's warranted because I'm a little bit frustrated with this guy. You might know him. He's a podcaster, fellow podcaster. Joe Rogan. You ever heard?
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. Okay, well, let me introduce you.
Tell me, what's his whole thing?
Okay, so he has a podcast and he talks, right? I probably have, just because like it's been out there for so long. I've probably listened to more Joe Rogan than anybody else. Just like in the background, just like his pod will be on, and
Same.
it has been for a lot of my life since I started listening to podcasts. Just like there, right?
Yeah.
And we've both witnessed him kind of going, not that he's ever been like Mr. Go-to guy for high level knowledge or whatever, but he's very fun to listen to. He's very good at what he does. Like everyone admits that. He's such a good podcaster. And it's kind of a good like role model for people on a lot of levels. I actually still like Joe. I would absolutely hang out with him. You know what I mean?
Hell yeah.
But he's gone down this like just weirdo wackadoo path. And this is a thing where he's been like, oh yeah, I'm a liberal, but then like does everything to just specifically promote Republican-esque talking points,
right,
and then downplay, unless he does like he has a couple special rants he reserves for why he still has
a couple special interest groups that he'll kind of fight for tooth and nail, like
which is
the
good.
homosexuals. He loves gay folks, which is fucking rad.
And he loves weed.
And dude, it's crazy. Like I have seen him a few times go really tooth and nail for gay folks. He'll be like, no, fuck that. Gay people are legit. Knock it off. And I'm like, all right, Joe. Fuck yeah, dude.
But there's just kind of like gross thing that he does, and it's just in terms of politics. This is why he no longer talks about politics.
I already know what you're going to talk about.
To me, it's just a little bit gross how he will have an absolute double standard for what is required for liberals to be okay versus what is required for Republicans to be on his okay list.
Yeah.
And it drives me crazy because I feel like he's better than that. Like so many people like Bridget Fetisi and all, like there's a whole world of people online who do this sort of a thing. And okay, so this is the prime example, and this blew up on Twitter this week. So this is why this even is on my radar. He had this moment where he's talking to this guy and he's talking about how like, dude, Biden.
He's talking about the Revolutionary War. He's like, one of the reasons why we lost the Revolutionary War, one of the problems with the Revolutionary War was they didn't have enough airports.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
I saw that. Like, what the hell?
Like, pull him.
Yeah.
And then so they play the clip of Joe Biden saying this, and Joe Biden isn't saying it. He's quoting Trump saying it.
Right.
And then and Joe Rogan like listens to this, still doesn't kind of get it. So Jamie like pulls up the clip of where Trump initially said it.
God bless you, Jamie.
God bless you, Jamie. And immediately, here's the thing. It wasn't like, because he was saying that Biden is disqualified because of this, like disqualified because of this moment, right? He doesn't say, oh, Trump said it, so because of the same thing, Trump is disqualified because of this. It's like,
right.
No, Trump just misspoke. Oh, just a harmless misunderstanding. This, like, it drives me so fucking crazy. Like, so crazy. Like, okay. Maybe while I get my thoughts together and why it drives me crazy, let me pass it to you. Like, you saw this whole thing, right?
I'm apoplectic.
Appropriately apoplectic.
I'm apoplectic about this. No, I am. You know what, man? I could just wax philosophic on this for like an hour, but I'm gonna really try not to. But let me distill a tight little package for you, and then I'll pass it back. But honestly, the thing that bothers me the most about Joe Rogan now is how much he complains. And I had to stop. Yeah. I had to stop listening to him for like a whole hundreds of episodes, because it would, for a minute there, you couldn't get more than like 5 minutes into a podcast where he would start complaining about something, but not in a way that not in a fun way or in a way that was fun to listen to, not in a funny way, which always kind of blows my mind that I don't know if I've ever laughed at something that Joe Rogan has said when on his podcast, even though he's the world's top comedian. I don't know, there's something about that, it baffles me. But it did really it I've seen this thing happen so many times with him now, and it really did for me start when he moved to Texas, because it was like this slow accretion of kind of subtle Republican ideas that I don't mind. I like Republican ideals in a certain way. What I don't like is the cucky, kind of cowardly, kind of bitch-like energy around like complaining about stuff and being afraid of stuff.
Yeah.
From a Republican point of view, because look, as much as I would like to see masculinity tempered towards the center of the spectrum, Republicans are supposed to represent like the fucking like the I don't know, like the heartstring of masculinity, which is cool unbotheredness, you know, and like there's just something so antithetical to his whole persona and his whole like ideological framework he's constructed around his podcast to sit there and complain at someone. And then on the other side of it, and we saw this happen in the clip that you mentioned, where people are so cucked out by Joe Rogan that like the guy immediately, you could just see his fucking penis crawl 5 inches inside him. He was just like, he just wanted to like become a little armadillo and like not have to comment on the fact that Joe Rogan was wrong in front of him, that Jesus Christ himself had misspoken. You know what I mean? And like just the terror kind of that you could see embedded deep in his stare, where he was just like, yeah, he's just waiting for Joe to cue him. Yeah. As you know, he's just waiting for Joe to be like, anyways, but Joe's kind of sitting there chewing on it in a not unlike Biden-esque fucking moment for Joe Rogan, where he's like fucking having some processing difficulty with this like cognitive dissonance he's constructed for himself, you know. Okay, that's it. Go, please take the rock, Pete.
Okay, well, you know how like the IDW, that was a thing a couple of years ago, the intellectual dark web. Well, it's Eric Weinstein's created this phrase, the intellectual dark web. And it encompassed like a lot of these people who were just like, they had a fairly big media presence online, but they all were like kind of anti-mainstream and were just generally trying to correct the record about what society, what like CNN and Fox News and the New York Times is just regular getting wrong and just like not even sane. They were this kind of crowd. Sure. Most of like Sam Harris, I think to me is kind of like the
people who fancy themselves countercultural iconoclasts.
But a lot of them were actually too. Like, I mean, Barry Weiss profiled everybody kind of involved in the New York Times, and it included Joe Rogan. It included like everybody you and I know and love that we just like listen to online. They're kind of like the IDW. This term is kind of like fallen to pieces. But in my mind, I bring this up because I feel like the IDW, which did in fact splinter off, but I think that kind of like the meaningful way to segment out how it splintered is to look at the group of people who are able to steel man an argument and see the value of that versus the people like Joe Rogan who like know the concept because his guests often like bring it up to him. But
he used to do it a lot.
Did he? Okay, I don't even remember that necessarily. But okay.
Absolutely.
Well, he certainly doesn't anymore. That's kind of like a little bit.
No, he does not.
And a lot of like, and also like Dave Rubin and other folks like this who are kind of like the ones who were like went right. They no longer do the fucking steel man thing.
I know.
Or even, save like 30 seconds in a conversation to have that moment and be like, okay. Here's the thing. In that moment with Joe Rogan fucking up about Joe Biden, too many Joes. He literally could have explained it in a way that I would have even bought about like why that gaffe is kind of okay when Trump says it, because Trump never thinks. He's just riffing.
Trump's riffing.
And he when he riffs, his brain goes on autopilot. He's clearly not even thinking. Not that he ever thinks too much anyway, but you can just, it's not that it's not necessarily an elder moment for him. It's a moment of him just like shutting his brain off and just talking. And I think that can be a difference between Joe Biden, who is the active president, and he can't shut his brain off. And it probably was more of an elder moment if he had said that, which he hadn't. It was like upper level that because he was making fun of his opponent saying that. So it was like very high level cognitive shit happening.
Right. True.
Okay. But like he could have made that case or something like that. I don't know.
I thought that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I thought the same thing. I know. I thought that's why the moment was kind of borderline pathetic,
Yeah.
because I was like, well, I think anybody that's kind of not emotionally wrapped up in what's in this little interchange you guys are watching can see that exactly what you said, where it's like, yeah, we can all acknowledge Trump's kind of riffing, and like he just be saying some patently absurd shit, all like it's just his brand. Biden, that's not his brand. And if he does make a lot of kind of like, just shit just slips right by him, or he'll just kind of mumble some wild shit. And like, yeah, exactly. You take a few minutes to kind of wind that out for a second. But it was the embarrassment coupled with how deeply he doubled down on the bit, Can I just say this? Here's what I want to see. Joe Rogan, if you're listening to my podcast.
Which of course you are.
Joe Rogan, so when you open up the next episode of Team Futurism, here's what I want from you, brother. Just stop getting so emotionally invested in things that you think are like bits, and just realize that if nobody laughed, it's not funny, and if you're complaining, we're bored. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody really wants to hear you complain about stuff. Like, Joe Rogan built his brand on being like a thoughtful arbiter of a cultural, like being like the cultural town square, and inviting people to come and platform their ideas. And he would, in a lot of ways really kind of be taking mental notes and push back against stuff. And I felt a lot of, especially in the early days, pre-episode 1000, where he was really like, you could tell he was doing his absolute best to keep up with the conceptual nature of like what a scientist was saying or what a health influencer was saying. And like, I feel like there's been a calcification of the man and his kind of affect and the way that he invites people on. Now it feels way less kind of culturally subjective, and it feels like we're looking through the Rogan lens at everything now, and that he's also using so many kind of unrelated things to shoehorn his way back into things that he's kind of like persnickety and frustrated about. And I'm like, man, dude, like this isn't nobody, like you're not like a killer personality, dog, like you're a good interviewer, like you're good at bringing the life out of people and asking thoughtful questions. You're not like Nick Cannon, like nobody, you know what I mean? Like you're not hella entertaining to watch on your own, even when you're being nice and generous. But when you're complaining, I mean, I'd rather watch a plate of dry turkey get drier.
I mean, this leads into my hot take here, which is that I think that Joe Rogan, I really think that he should just give up podcasting, at least for a couple of years, because it doesn't even matter who the guest is or what the topic is. Like you just said there, he just regurgitates the same talking points. And you know how people, especially to say it, older-ish people just do this, where you'll meet them again, you'll have a conversation, and it's just loops and loops and loops and loops. And you've had the same conversation for the last 5 years with that person, even though
but he's not that old. It's so crazy.
I think that hits when you are, I mean, it can hit at like 40, where you just like you I don't know, like people just have stories and just go back to them. How many times has Joe Rogan had a comedian on and told a story you've never heard before?
Oh my God. How many times has he had a comedian on and he's talked about ivermectin?
Or like said the phrase on the road. Like they all just talk about like their stories on the road, and it's the same painful, boring stories. I can't stand. I used to listen to these.
LA's a hellscape. They grilled me over ivermectin. They don't want us to know. It's like there's like 4 horses that are so dead, and he's just beating them so hard, man.
Back in the day in New York, or I mean, whatever, the whole thing. And like I get it. I will say in the sense that each time he's having a fresh conversation with a real person, and everyone kind of does this where we have things that we go to talk about with like new people. Like it's almost like he doesn't quite comprehend though that like his audience has all heard this shit a million fucking times, and it's so done. Like it's over. It's so done. There's other people that I listen to, other podcasts, and like Sam Harris again. Now they're like prop him up too much, but where like I've listened to a million episodes of his, but he doesn't. He brings on guests and keeps it about the guest. He doesn't
Yeah.
make everything about himself and like his
Mhm.
personal grievances with the culture.
Right.
You know, I don't know, and that's the
Yeah,
mark of
Lex
like a
Friedman
mature
too.
podcaster.
I mean, like,
Yep, great.
it's
Yep.
it's so crazy now to watch like a Lex Friedman podcast where he's grown so much as a podcaster, and he's so generous and he's so thoughtful and he's so calm, and he's just really is like kind of what Joe Rogan was, where he's not a particularly colorful personality, but he is asking really thoughtful questions. He's kind of synthesizing the information that as he goes along and keeping up with the guest, even though he's obviously like a scientist. He's smart enough to kind of be there enough to ask the next most, relevant question. And Joe used to do that too with all kinds of people. And it's like, yeah, I think that, so I've seen this happen a lot in my life. I'm 34 and I've seen a lot of people get rich. And it's kind of the same thing happens every time. And I like to call it the fiefdom complex. Because as soon as you give a man a dominion that he rules over, like, will he be a good king or will he be a bad king? And like, I've not seen too many people become good kings, whether it's a piece of property or $1 million or just the biggest paycheck you've ever gotten or whatever. There's like this weird sense of propriety that I think like everybody kind of has their version of like, okay, this is when I will own a kingdom, whether it's a house or a property or $100 million or a Spotify contract or whatever. And I feel this kind of court holding energy from him now, where he's like, holding court, because and there's like this wild cognitive dissonance. And I'm gonna try to strike at the psychology of this a little bit, because I don't think I've really tried to do that much. But so Joe has this extreme aversion to himself being referenced as the cultural juggernaut that he is. And you can feel it, man, dude. It doesn't matter if it's Shane Gillis, a homie, or if it's a random person. As soon as he's self-referenced, as soon as his power is referenced in front of him, he becomes so cagey and so evasive. And I'm like, in a certain way, up until now, I get that, because you have to maintain some level of compartmentalization with like fame and influence in order to remain yourself. But then there becomes a point at which that's not possible anymore, because you're so famous that everybody knows who you are and treats you as such. And I think that's the point at which you have to be able to break that barrier and understand the importance of your role and wear it. Because everybody wants to see him wear the coat he deserves to wear. And for him to kind of shy away from it and shrug it off, it feels like an abdication of self-awareness in a certain fundamental way.
I might push back on this, actually. I might push
Oh,
back.
please.
I think that this might actually be an insight that he's had, that the non-famous cool dude, I'm just the average Joe, is his brand.
It was.
No, but like
until he became Joe Rogan.
No, I know, but like that's exactly what I'm saying. He's trying to hold on to that brand.
And I think that's what's causing him to have the kind of like the extreme episodes of cognitive dissonance that we're seeing now. Because I think if he had a little bit better grip of self-awareness and kind of like perspectiving, or having a kind of 20,000 foot view of his situation and things, there would be ways. Because what I think is happening is he'll have someone sit down and in full faith think, okay, we're just two dudes in a room talking. And it's like, well, you see Jeff Bezos and the way that he thinks about being in a room with people, and he immediately is self-correcting for the power balance. And that is a deeply, deeply intelligent thing that you can't do if you don't believe yourself to be powerful. So it's like you can hide your head in the sand. He's kind of ostriching right now, where he's putting his head in the sand. He's saying, I'm not this powerful, famous person. Okay, maybe I am. But, that's not the most salient aspect of me. And it's like, well, unfortunately, Joe, it is now. And if you don't take control of that power and start correcting for it, then all you're going to have is a parade of your little fucking cuck fanboys that are afraid to say anything to you that it maybe feels like it's pushing back. I haven't heard someone push back on Joe Rogan in like 1,000 episodes, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, in any fucking meaningful way, people are terrified to challenge the king, and he seems totally unaware of it.
Yeah, I do want to say this actually reminds me of a point that I wanted to make, which is that on our last episode, I cut out a good like 15, 20-minute chunk, and it was entertaining. We have a we have a micro pod, like our podcast doesn't even exist in the ocean as a drop of water compared to Joe Rogan's podcast. I still like, I have I don't mind us like BSing and riffing and like getting things wrong, but we had a chunk where you and I were both just like talking about the medical industry. Yeah. And I looked up a couple things. It turned out we were both wrong, and it just wasn't worth putting it out there. And so I just like cut out 15 minutes and like no sweat off any, like who cares? Yeah. I think that's kind of like that's a responsibility that I feel as an utter, like total, actually legit nobody. Talk about the biggest platform on the planet. He should have a team of people going through, like he owes this to the world. I think he owes it to the world, not only to himself and his like the fact that he can constantly embarrass himself these days. He owes it, I think, to his audience to be like, I'm just not going to put this out there. I'm going to maybe have some notes in this one, or like on the screen, this is going to flash up or whatever. Or I'm going to I listen to this podcast, Blocked and Reported, and it's two journalists. Katie Herzog and Jesse Singal, like they have their rapport is just so great. But almost every other episode, they start the episode with corrections going back and like and I just appreciate this so much. I wish every podcast did this, because every podcast does get stuff wrong, because we are just sitting here talking in conversation. Sorry, like everybody, we get stuff wrong when we're talking, right? Yeah. And Joe Rogan doesn't even do that.
He's got such a laissez-faire attitude towards it, which made sense at like a lower level of influence. But like you only really get to be like, people will figure it out, and like dudes are dudes, we're just gonna fucking talk shit, and like what I'm saying. It's like, but it's not the green room of the comedy club, Joe. You know what I'm saying? Like the things that you say have pretty serious implications, and like there's a childishness for me, and an immaturity of.
Just not recognizing who he is and what.
And it's like, are you?
You sold me on this.
and like, thank you. And I feel like he prides himself on being such a mentally tough person, and such like a rigorous person, and the fact that he still needs to compartmentalize his identity in that way, to me, is a little pathetic and a little kind of like mentally weak. In a way that's would be excusable for a normal person, but for a person at that level of influence, to me, is inexcusable. I mean, you can't fucking square your average guy persona and your wealth, like, dog. You know what I mean? Like, having to maintain compartmentalization is like a good stopgap technique or a defense mechanism to keep yourself safe. Like, a lot of artists do that, right? Like, we create personas, identities, things that allow us to breathe artistic life into something that is not us.
Okay, I just had a thought.
Please.
This is my cynical moment for the day.
Oh, love it.
I wonder how much, like the Joe Rogans, the Tim Pools, people like that, who kind of like, we're kind of liberal, but we totally lean right on everything. I wonder if a lot of that, and also spreading things that turn out to be factually incorrect, I wonder if that's semi-intentional, in the sense that when you say something wrong and there's pushback, that's engagement. And that means more eyeballs, and that means in general a bigger platform. So maybe not Joe Rogan, because he already is as big as you can get, but probably more like a Tim Pool. I think that he probably does intentionally put out information that he knows is factually incorrect, because it will just get him, he'll be trending on Twitter. And if you trend on Twitter, that's, whether it's for a good reason or a bad reason, that's good for your brand. That's good for you. And like, it's kind of interesting, like the biggest episode, not that it's huge or whatever, but like our only like semi impressive like
True.
per count episode was when we were just going off on Vivek Ramaswamy and like calling him out for being like a pretty dumb person. And everyone who watched that video hated it and thought that we were
Oh,
totally
yeah.
full of shit.
It was awesome.
But it was awesome because it's like, oh hey, look,
So cool.
we did that. We did that thing. We were like, oh, this is great. We were saying things that were like absolutely true though, and completely
True.
the right takes. So
Yeah.
I feel a bit guilt about it. But yeah, I could imagine being like just getting thirsty for that and being like, okay, let's just always go after somebody and like just like call shit out. You know what I mean? And like,
You know what I
piss
think it
people
is?
off, that will get views. Yeah.
I think these guys like wake up in the middle of a conversation to realize that they've got their own cock stuffed deeply in their own mouths. Like they just fucking like really like I do think that it's like a thing where it's so hard. Like as you get older and as you become more powerful and wise and whatever, like there's all these little ways that you have to check in with yourself, especially as you become more powerful. Like I manage people, in my job day to day. At the moment, not really, but I have for a long time, and occasionally I still do. And like having that power, there's all this little checklist in my head of like, oh, if I'm mad at somebody, I'm gonna have to take them outside. I'm not gonna castigate them in front of the group, or just little teeny things like that you remind yourself like, oh, I'm in power and I don't want people to feel, that it's been misused. And so here, I'm just gonna kind of check in with this stuff. And I think a lot of these dudes just kind of like, they're waxing on their idea, and they everybody around them is so excited to hear their ideas. Nobody's pushing back against them, and I think it's just kind of like, they're just talking and talking, blah, 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 you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden they're saying something that's patently false because they just got a little high on their own supply, high on their own charisma. I don't know, man. I think it's just reckless lack of self-awareness sometimes, mostly.
Yeah. No, I think that you're right. It's just unfortunate.